Okay. Hello to everybody joining us. So another question for Teak, is it possible to do like a pinned comment in the chat or like a comment or something to let people know that we're doing the housing item until we reach a quorum? I don't know if...
I will look into that. I do not know out of the top of my head.
Okay. So to those who are just joining us, we have not reached a quorum. We're about 30 or so members shy. In the meantime, to not waste everybody's time, we're going to hear a presentation from some of the executives about the ongoing sort of housing crisis in Waterloo. So I shall share my screen. Well, it's already shared, but do the presentation.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I heard echo from someone's thing, so I will assume that is indeed the case. The Vice President of WUSA just wanted to take the opportunity to talk about housing. As the subtitle makes it pretty apparent, housing is not in the greatest state right now. Perhaps was not in a great state even before the pandemic. So if you could go to the next slide, Catherine. We just want to talk about housing in three parts. The first one sort of covers research that we've done about students' experiences with housing within the Waterloo region, both in particular this term and prior to that, and some of the advocacy work that's been going on with regards to that. The next two sections focus more on problem solving. So with regards to looking at solutions by perhaps WUSA's involvement in the housing market, or looking at residences, campus housing as one pathway to go. So at the end of each section, we're going to have a period for any questions or comments you may have. We're hoping that this will be like an ongoing conversation. So if there's anything that you think of or want to share with us after the fact, you can email us collectively at exec.wusa.ca. Yep, so feel free to go ahead. Yeah, and you can thank Catherine for all the amazing titles.
I thought I would seek to entertain a little bit.
Yeah, you know what? We're in the middle of pandemic. Might as well. We already started with a cat, so it's the Waterloo way. Okay. So WUSA conducted a housing report in December of 2020 and 2021. So this housing report was requested by council a couple of years ago, actually, after a data breach had occurred with one of the major housing companies that revealed a lot of issues within student housing and really started getting the conversation going there. So the survey was done to understand students' experiences with housing in the Waterloo region. What are the biggest barriers and challenges that are being faced? What are things that have already been done? What is currently being done? What options did we have to go? So this became the basis for WUSA's housing-related government advocacy. So in WUSA's role, obviously, we generally can't build houses. We don't control the provincial government or the federal government, unfortunately, but we can influence their decisions, and it's very important to have research to inform the government's policy decisions. So we've been presenting this research to our local ward councillors, to the mayors, to our local MPPs and MPs to get across really what the experience is like for Waterloo students. Something that is rather unique about Waterloo is that 42% of all purpose-built student housing, so all those high-rises you see that are specifically targeted at providing housing to students, like 42% of that entire housing stock in Canada is found in Waterloo, which means that we face different challenges than other university communities. So if we can go to the next slide. And I would encourage you to look at the links that were attached there if you want to read the housing report in its full. So when it came to this upcoming semester, and around the November time, we began to realize from a lot of emails that we got from students, as well as stuff we heard from counselors and scrolling through the Reddits, was that students were facing issues of finding housing. We knew this anecdotally, but obviously if we want to impact decision makers, we did need evidence for this. And we were finding when we were talking to the university administration about our housing concerns, it was very easy for them to kind of frame it as, well, you know, maybe they're not trying hard enough. Maybe they're being picky. Maybe anything that isn't 5 minutes from campus isn't worth, you know, students' time. So we really had to do some fact checking around that. And thank you for everyone who answered the housing survey and shared it. It was one of the most responses for surveys that we put out. So we understand that it's a very important issue for students. So we did approach the administration with evidence that demonstrated that a lot of students did not have backup plans when it came to accessing campus. We also found that students weren't being unreasonably picky. They really weren't. So as a result of this, we've presented it to our university partners with the goal of asking them to maximize students' ability to learn without reliable access to campus. Based on our data, it looks to be the case that a lot of students will be commuting in. Commuting in during winter time especially can be unsafe, and we want to empower students such that if it isn't safe driving conditions or safe conditions to get into a GO bus, that they can feel comfortable staying at home. And we want to improve the availability of on-campus spaces for students required to come onto campus. So we've conveyed this to the university administration. At very least for item 3, they did commit to expanding the amount of study space and eating space available for students. When it comes to the other 2, that's been a lot more complicated conversation. The university is unwilling to mandate professors to provide materials online, which would definitely help to address those problems. We're continuing advocacy on that. Unfortunately, it is very difficult, but we will keep you posted. Feel free to go next slide. Okay, so just going to use this opportunity right now, and I believe you have access to the chat. So if you would like to comment there, or you can raise your hand, and I believe Ben can give you speaking rights. But if there's anything you want to comment sort of on your experiences with housing, what you've been seeing, that would be really helpful for us to know. Merci beaucoup.
Vincent?
Hello, Vice President. You said earlier that we can't build houses. Why not? Why can't we just buy lots and start building housing?
I said that in most cases we could not build housing. Matthew will touch upon that more at the 3rd section of this presentation, so I'll wait until that.
Shannon?
I was wondering how much of this report was considered when WUSA was taking their stances on return to campus, and just in general when we were communicating the university about the issues the students are having, especially this term with terms of lack of housing, not being able to find anything. So just general idea on that and how that influenced our policies.
Yeah. I'll say that most of our policy decisions around return to campus was, sorry, there's a lot of distracting things going on. The committee that was ultimately responsible for relaying our decision on how we felt about return to campus was aware of the housing issues. They weren't given the exact report, but the information summarized in the report was relayed to them, and we did have ongoing conversations about the housing concerns. I believe they thought that as long as the university were to also provide options for people to access materials online, that would be sort of fair. Obviously, there's this I guess, contrast, like, sorry, I'm trying to think of a way to explain it. It was in the opinion of the committee that they did not want to risk not having the availability of in-person options. So they did not want to go the route of, in light of the housing issues, ask the university to keep everything online. So it was considered, is what I'll say.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ken. Next is Connor.
Thank you. So I just wanted to kind of touch upon like the questions on the slides right now about like where I've personally been living and where I know some of like the people I've been talking to have been living, and kind of just like how difficult to predict it is and the different change in landscape it has been since like December. I can relate to especially a lot of the UW students that are traveling midterm towards Waterloo and continuing their studies, because last term I actually did the exact same thing. And it's very difficult to find housing. And in my opinion, in my personal experience, when I found a place, it was either too much, I had to pay too much in rent, or it was barely manageable. I lived in a place that was actually in Kitchener. It was luckily along the LRT line. I actually had no windows in my place, and I did not have access to a full kitchen. My kitchen consisted of 2 hot plates, a mini fridge, and a bathroom sink, as well as a microwave. I was able to bring other small appliances as well, but it just showing the context as to how some students are living, which is crazy. And then on the other hand, some people, there's no housing options available, where some students are actually going towards Airbnbs. And I've known students that are paying upwards to $1,000 bi-weekly. So that's $2,000 a month just to live in Waterloo, which is obviously astronomical. So yeah, I just wanted to give a bit of some context as to the different change in landscape, as well as how people are kind of seeing this continued shift, as well as it's very difficult to predict. So yeah, thank you for letting me speak.
Thanks, Connor. And there's some good feedback coming in the chat talking about, for example, Amanda Ferguson, I lost a lot of money because schools moved online and I couldn't move. I don't know if it makes sense for me to read every comment, but thanks to everybody that's contributing, and we'll go to Naman next.
Hi. So one thing I would like to point out is, thankfully, I haven't had any housing concerns this term personally, but the people who I know who have had those concerns, the primary problem has been that they eventually did find something, right? And then when the return to campus was delayed, they rented it away back, right? And that while that might not have been the smartest decision, but it really does speak to like the amount of trust students can place in the university, and the announcements. Like if there is a delay for like 10 days or something, the students will start to believe that this is going to be an online term now or whatever, right? So yeah, again, I think some of it comes down to the students just not making the right decisions, but also some of it comes down to like the students not having the trust that the university stands by them. And I think that's a big part in how everything came about.
Thank you. And next is Canon.
Not a question, Ben. I think I just wanted to mention that so that people in the meeting know that chats are not recorded as part of the recording. So if they want something on the official record, to please like put a hand up and speak, so like it is in there.
Thanks, Canon. And yeah, right now, like I just have the participants list open. I have tried to sort of alternate back and forth, but yeah, that's right. The chat is sort of an aside almost.
I am taking notes on what's being put in the chat, but they're not being contributed to particular individuals. So I guess just keep that in mind. If you just want to relay it to me, then it has already been relayed.
Excellent.
And also sorry that you folks have had these experiences. It's definitely tough, and I'm sorry that we haven't been able to successfully get the university to offer any assurances to you.
Thanks, Steph. So I'll just say for people that have joined us, the meeting has not yet met quorum, so we're doing a housing presentation sort of informally. We are very close to quorum. We have, I think, 141 people here, and 50 people registered, 49 people registered to vote by proxy, which is, we're within like about 10 of reaching quorum. So once again, this is your friends are still not late if you can reach out. There is also a giveaway for participants. I think it's 3. My vice presidents would be able to speak better to that. But in any case, we should continue with the presentation. And Mike, if you can just continue to sort of monitor the quorum situation, and if you can just put your hand up, then we can sort of formally call the meeting to order, and we should continue.
Cameron, 3 WUSA bucks.
Sounds good. Yeah, I'll let you know when that happens.
Okay, thanks. So then we shall continue with presentation. I'm not sure, Catherine or Matthew, if this is one of you.
I'm handing it off to Catherine.
Thanks, Steph. So basically, over the last little while, campus housing has been doing some mastermind planning, some strategic planning for the direction that the next few years of campus housing development and priorities and strategy will be going. I guess we can go to the next slide. That would probably have more information. Campus housing operates a few little like bubbles of residences around the campus. So there's that little bubble with V1 and Rev, and then there's UW Place with CMH and all the other housing places over there. There's Columbia Lake Village, and then there's also Monona Hagee, just on the edge of campus, and they are trying to figure out some strategies going forward. And so I am hoping to sort of just ask if people have lived in campus housing before, if they still do and why they stayed, or if they decided to move out and why, and what you sort of see as the unique value that campus housing is here to provide undergraduates, and what you think they really ought to be focused on the next few years. The church college, yes, I'm very sorry for forgetting the colleges, although they are not campus housing strictly speaking. With respect to COVID spread, I would recommend emailing their contact email. I'm really sorry. I wish I could give you more information right here. I do intend to sort of poke around and see if I can better understand what the communications are looking like around there, because I know that it's really stressful for a lot of students who are already living in residences, as well as people who are supposed to move in soon. So I'm really sorry that is a spot that you're in right now. And I hope that we can sort of secure the communication that we ought to have. I guess one quick question. Are we at quorum?
I believe so.
We are not at quorum.
How many more people am I?
The last count was around 170, and that was a couple minutes ago. So there is a certain number that says 188 on my screen, but that is total people who have come in and left. It is not people who are actively in the meeting.
So Mike, on my screen, I see 147 attendees plus 7 presenters.
Yes, yeah. So that is the most live number that we have. The higher number is elsewhere. The other part about those 147 is that we cannot verify everyone's identity because there are some people using just guest accounts. So we do not have people, we don't have enough students who we can verify are voting members.
I'm just doing final few checks.
Yeah. So as soon as people sign in with their what I am, we will be able to know that we have enough voting members who can access the meeting.
Excellent. Yeah, so if folks are here and they are able to log out and rejoin using their like Waterloo credentials for Teams, then we can verify identities. We are really on like the precipice of quorum. So this is good stuff. Catherine, do you want to continue sort of this line of questioning for members of the present at the meeting, or should we go on to the third part of this presentation?
I suppose it depends if members have anything to offer, but I feel like everybody's quite focused and enthralled by the battle to reach quorum right now. I suppose if anybody has any thoughts on this whole campus housing ordeal, feel free to drop in the chat, and I'll record them for myself, even though they won't be on record for the meeting. Or you can email me, and I'm happy to pass this off to Matthew.
Okay. Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you very much. So this is the slightly different part of the presentation where I'm talking a little bit about one of the ideas that sort of came out of our Students' Council that is sort of being investigated right now, something that I've been tasked with. And now it's certainly a bit of a longer term talk. It's not something that we'll be able to do next term or something like that, but it's a bit of look at sort of WUSA's opportunity, and if WUSA has an opportunity to get involved in the housing market directly to serve students. Because the trouble with the housing market here in Waterloo and everywhere across the country is that it's a private housing market. It's something that the city has limited ability to affect, the government has limited ability to affect, and private corporations tend not to be too persuaded by us knocking on the door and asking them to make conditions better for students without a profit motive. So one of the things that was brought up is, in line with some of the other student associations across the country and abroad, would there be an opportunity for WUSA to get directly involved in the housing market? If we can move along to our next, thank you very much. So in December 2021, I was tasked with working with our research team, our commercial operations, whatever else I could find, to sort of take a look at the feasibility of this. And this is obviously, again, a big undertaking, but it's something that I thought was very interesting and wanted to bring forward to you all. There's a number of different models that are used that some student associations in Canada and abroad have used. Some may get involved in the housing market directly. They may purchase land and build student housing, or they may acquire an existing building, and that's sort of where the association gets as directly involved as possible. But there are a number of middle grounds between what we're doing now and what that could look like. Concordia University, the Students Association there, I believe recently got involved with a local housing cooperative. So they partnered with this cooperative, was able to give them support and help them in expanding their offerings. And housing cooperatives like WCRI near campus, as some of you may be familiar with, are run and owned by the membership, the people that live there, the tenants. So they tend, in our experience, to be a lot more ethical. They're there to serve their members because they're owned by their members, and their members make decisions in general meetings just like the one that we're trying to have right now. I personally live at WCRI, and I very much enjoy that, and I've heard a lot of very good reviews from them on that measure. So there's certainly a number of issues, as I'm seeing in the chat. There would be issues, like, for example, it only benefit a part of students. That is exactly one of the things I see in the chat. Thank you, Lawrence. And this is very true. That's why it's being looked at and how this would work out. When it comes to any effort, any kind of housing thing, it would only benefit a partial amount of students. We can't, suddenly open 36,000 new rooms. One of the benefits that could come from either WUSA getting directly involved or supporting an external partner is that the greater portion of the market that serves that kind of that provides that kind of service, that kind of better housing, more decent housing, more reliable rents, hopefully more fair rents, and perhaps more fair contract lengths. Those are all things that, as a greater proportion of the market offers that, the more of an impetus that the other players in the market will have to comply with that. Because otherwise, if a great proportion of the market was offering, for example, a lot shorter term contracts or lower rents, then other players in the market, if they want to be able to fill their rooms up quickly, are going to have to compete with that. So there's sort of a lot of different nuances there. And again, things that we're exploring. This is not something that's going to happen, next month, next term, but it'd be a long-term project if it was something that was undertaken. So that's sort of some of the direction that could go in. And as noted on the slide there's a number of different ways that could look like. That could be WUSA providing support to an external co-op. That could be something like providing accounting support, some of the administrative support, something that sometimes other orgs aren't as well positioned to do, but that we can use our existing resources to sort of create that synergy and lower costs as well.
You've become muted.
I don't know that happened. I think I hit my spacebar. My apologies. If WUSA were to get involved directly and invest in housing, buy housing, or build housing, that's something that would take a very large capital investment. So that's another one of the hurdles that would have to be beaten over. Obviously, you do what anyone would do, get a very large mortgage and a very large amount of funds, but you generally need a fair amount of money to start out with. And that's something that could look like a voluntary optional fee for students to fund this. It could look like some other kind of fundraising efforts. Again, all things to be explored. And for that kind of thing, I'm sort of reminded of that quote about society being great when people are planting trees under which they won't sit. And that's the kind of thing we'd be looking at here. This isn't something that we'd really feasibly be able to benefit current students with. It's something that could only benefit the students of tomorrow, which is what makes it a bit of an open question and certainly an interesting question. But it is a real question as to if that makes sense for our student body. And that's sort of why this research is being done. So if anyone has any thoughts on that, if you have any ideas or thoughts or questions, opposition, whatever, I'd very much love to hear it. You can email me at vpof@wusa.ca. I'm also keeping an eye on the chat here. And it's something that I've asked our research teams to do research into. And should a proposal, something that could theoretically make sense work, that would only come after a huge amount of consulting with the student body to make sure that that fit and is right with that for them. This is very much a question, not an assertion.
Thanks Matthew. Naman, go ahead.
Yeah, I had one question about this. Okay, so one of the points that you brought forward is that this should this should like bring down the housing market because the other players have to compete with you. And I was just like wondering about the efficacy of that, because just like imagine that there are like hundreds of stores selling cake, right? And they're selling it at $10. And if I bake a cake at home and I sell it at $5, that doesn't really change the price of the cake market, right? So given the size of the operation that WUSA will probably conduct, like even a small operation is going to cost a lot of money. So like given the size of the operation that WUSA can conduct, are the benefits going to be worth it proportional to the amount of money we're going to be spending?
I'll be honest in that I can't answer that question right now because that's what the research is meant to do. What are the returns that the student unions get out of this kind of investment? What does it look like for real student experiences? I can't really answer that question because that's what the research and that's what that work is for. I'm in no way pitching this as some sort of cure-all to our problems or that it could solve, the issues of current students. It is, if anything, a very long-term idea that could be an option for our student body and our university, really. But it's, yes, long-term nature is extraordinarily complex. It's not something that is going to affect us tomorrow, and it's something that takes a lot of looking into, particularly by people more qualified than me to assess investments. Thankfully, we're able to communicate with some of these people and work with some of these people, but certainly more qualified than I am to assess investments.
Mike, how are we doing on the quorum front?
At least for my team, it looks pretty good. It's It's about 166 people plus 7, so we're at 172 plus 50 for quorum, or from proxies. So even if the discrepancies could be 20, it can be okay. There's a few guest accounts here or there, but I think we're okay.
Yeah. I concur.
Okay, then I will stop sharing my screen so I can close this PowerPoint.
Ben, one note, once we do the official start to the meeting, territorial acknowledgement is something that we
Yes. I will go to the agenda that I'll put up on my screen. Okay. Okay, here we go, folks. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so I will call this meeting to order at 5:57 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I will take the chair, and the agenda has been approved already. So we go to the Territorial Acknowledgement. WUSA acknowledges that our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Waterloo is situated on the Haldimand Tract, land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. As we are, gathering electronically, I encourage everybody present to sort of reflect on the specific context of the lands on which they live, and as we continue to reckon with the global phenomenon of colonialism and how it continues to shape the world in which we live. That brings us to the third item on the agenda, which is a ratification of bylaw amendments to postpone the 2022 general election. And I will give a presentation on the governance review to sort of contextualize this this work. And I'm not going to do like a formal presentation just because it gets confusing for me to be able to see the teams and my slides. But before I start, Cannon appears to have a question.
Then I would like to move a special order to rescind Robert rule that requires that quorum be present for the entirety of the meeting. I don't know the exact framing for this, but I think we have worked a long time to get this quorum, and even if 2 people leave, it's easy to cancel this meeting. And I think it's important that we actually are able to discuss the things that we have on the agenda.
Okay. So there is no motion on the floor presently, I guess. What I'll say is there is a motion like quite soon on this agenda to I don't know how appropriate it is to have that question reach the floor when the agenda has been specified, with a certain period in advance, and there is an item on this agenda to alter the quorum of these meetings. So I'm not sure if it is appropriate to do that at this time.
This is just for this meeting, just for the special GM. So basically, if we do end up losing a few people, we can still continue the meeting. And legally, we're not required to continue having the quorum for the entirety of the meeting. It's under only Robert's rules, and we can suspend Robert rules or parts of Robert rules.
Okay. Okay. So then, So Ken, I'm gonna say that won't be in order. That motion will not reach the floor. We're gonna do the presentation, and if it comes up during, once we get into the speaking turn and sort of the formal debate, if that comes up, then we can consider it at that time.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Okay. So WUSA governance review. Perhaps the reason that you're here. You may want to know, what is governance? So here's a definition from the Canadian Audit and Accountability Foundation. So governance is an organizational structure which assigns decision-making authority, defines how decisions are made, and sets strategy. It oversees, governance oversees the service delivery of an organization and the implementation of policy. And it has sort of mechanisms to report on performance and provide feedback to improve operations of an organization. WUSA tries to govern itself on sort of a democratic basis. We exist to serve our members, and ultimately they have control over our organization through groups like this general meeting, for example. And we strive to be transparent, which is a requirement for any accountable organization. And clarity in decision-making power sort of helps to promote this value of transparency. So a little very brief introduction into how WUSA is governed presently. There's a Students' Council with about 35 representatives of the membership who establish advocacy priorities, propose the budget, oversee the societies, and WUSA, that includes clubs and services or campus life activities. And then we have a board of directors, which has 8 members responsible for corporate functions. So this is human resources, legal, finance, audit, so on and so forth. And budget approval, I should say. That budget is sort of shared between the two. Then there are executives who are 4 full-time students who work for the org and take time off their studies and report to board and council, kind of sitting between the governance of the organization and the day-to-day work that is done in addition to our staff, full-time and part-time. So here's a sort of a schematic of the existing governance model. And the key thing to see is that there are a lot of sort of interrelation between board, students' council, the executive, and the ownership, which sort of exercises control over all of them. The ownership can take the form of a general meeting like this one, where the board is typically elected at the annual general meeting. This is a special general meeting. Can give direction to council and board. Council can advise the board on decisions. Executives kind of sit in the middle and are kind of pulled in many ways. And so essentially we have observed over a number of years a number of issues with this governance system. So it's rather complex. There are, dozens of committees between these two bodies, maybe not dozens, about a dozen committees. There are sort of oftentimes open questions about the scope of where one body fits and one doesn't. Councilors might be really interested in corporate functions like the budget and other issues. Members of the board might be particularly interested in advocacy, and sort of keeping people in silos is often difficult when people sort of just want to get involved. Executives are sort of put in the middle of this, and we've observed that, especially in online, but even before then, well before then, the phenomenon of executive burnout, where sort of the inertia of the organization prevents executives who run on, often rather specific platforms about what they want to do. Basically, they spend their year hitting their head against the wall and not being able to accomplish what they want. And, for context, WUSA is a sizable bureaucracy. We have approximately 50 full-time staff, several hundred part-time staff, a $7 million annual operating budget. We're responsible for another 40 million or so in transfers and programs, including insurance, GRT UPass, transfers to the societies. And so really the key thing to note here is that student leaders do what they do because they want to be, advocating the student interest and acting as ambassadors. They are not particularly well equipped to be administrators. So hence the governance review, where basically we worked with a set of professional consultants who did interviews with people involved in WUSA governance in various capacities, and they have proposed this model that you see on your screen, which is a single governing board and a permanent CEO model. They have recommended that this board have 13 members and 2 executives that are elected among that group. And the key thing is that there is a clear separation between student governance and staff operations. So essentially, the board is elected among every student. So this would be basically presently our Students' Council has sort of constituencies by faculty and college and satellite campus and so on. This would be any student can vote for any student. No barriers. You just run and you get as many votes, and the most people with the most votes get on it. And then among the 13 members who are elected to the board, they elect among themselves a president and a vice president, which is a departure from what we have now. And the idea is that then we would have a full-time staff executive director, which we presently call the general manager. And they would basically be the CEO of the organization and responsible for reporting on all of the activities of the organization to the board. So it's a simplification of our governance model. So as I mentioned earlier, the board members being elected at large eliminates the traditional faculty campus, satellite campus constituencies. All students can vote for any student. And in the report, the consultants there's a literature on sort of like the ability of democratic systems like to be representative. And they suggest that this is the best way to have, the most popular people elected. For example, in our current system, you might have one constituency where nobody runs and there's no competitive election, and another faculty where there are competitive elections. And then the question arises, well, if there are, two more people than there are, if there are competitive races in one and not enough people in another, this is a way to address that problem, basically. And it addresses the issue of the clarity of responsibilities. The board answers directly to the membership through annual election and can speak clearly and definitively on behalf of the organization. Student governance volunteers would be responsible for setting the direction of the organization and evaluating the staff who are responsible for implementing it. So to do this, we need a new set of bylaws to be written and approved. So the timeline basically to date is that in November, we received the report, we presented it to our board and council, who both accepted it sort of in principle, meaning they like the idea of, they support continuing the project further, not necessarily that they endorse every single recommendation. In the report, there are like 80 or so. We'll have it uploaded to the website for people to access. I'm sure somebody might be able to get a link faster as soon as I say that. But the point is, there are a lot of things in there. We haven't said yes to every single one. When we presented it to the report to council, we asked sort of how quickly do we want to work on this? Do we want to try to get it in this year and have an election this winter term to the new model to start May 1st? Do we want to wait a full year and have one last year under our present model? Or there's sort of the Goldilocks option, which was chosen to extend the governing year, meaning that we would postpone elections that typically are occurring right now into sometime in the future, likely the spring term, to have enough time to sort of work through this new set of bylaws and elect people to the new model, train them sufficiently, and have the org kind of go from there. And then in future years, we would continue to have winter elections. So in December, we brought in a so-called temporary amending bylaw to deal with this question. And at this very special general meeting that you are all attending, we are considering that temporary amending bylaw. Then council meets this coming Sunday, where we're going to present the new set of bylaws. And that is going to be a very important meeting. And I encourage folks to attend or to speak to their council representatives, because that is where we are going to sort of deal with the specific questions. For example, the consultants have recommended that we have an at-large board. Presently, we have this sort of constituency system. So council will likely decide at that meeting specifically what we want to see, if we're going to have an at-large or a constituency board, or they recommend that the president and vice president be elected from the board. We might choose that we want to have people specifically run for president and vice president. There might be questions about the size of the board. So at that meeting of council upcoming, we expect to sort of deal with that. Then we'll have at our annual general meeting, which will be similar to this in March, hopefully a new set of bylaws ratified and ready to go. for a spring term election to the new model. So that is that. I'm happy to take questions or perhaps what I'll do is actually just read the motion that's on the floor and get a mover and a seconder, and then we can deal with the motions specifically. And if people have questions about the governance review that come up then, like, we'll deal with them. I know it's an imperfect solution, but I just don't want to have like the real question, like the purpose of that presentation is basically to like let you know why this bylaw amendment has been proposed and how we got here. So I'll read the motion. Be it resolved that the special general meeting ratified the following bylaw amendments as approved by Students' Council and the Board of Directors. To insert a new subsection 2(4) in Article 7 of the bylaw. Quote, notwithstanding any other provisions of these bylaws, for the election scheduled to occur in 2022, the Board of Directors may, on the advice of the Students' Council, defer this election to any date that is not later than 12 months after the annual general meeting. In the event that the election is deferred, the incumbent directors shall remain in office until their successors have been elected or have taken office. And to insert a new subsection 1(3) in Article 11 of the bylaw, quote, notwithstanding any other provision of these bylaws for the election scheduled to occur in 2022, the Board of Directors may, on the advice of the Students' Council, defer this election to any date that is not later than 12 months after the end of the winter academic term. In the event that the election is deferred, the incumbent president and vice presidents shall remain in office until their successors have been elected and have taken office. There's also like a formal document that our lawyers prepared that you can see. So the board has already approved this, and we're sort of at this confirmation piece. So I'll leave this on the thing. And so I'll ask, is there a mover to this motion? You can raise your hand to indicate so. Vicky moves, Vicky Econo, and Amelia Cami will second. So now we'll open a speaking list to the motion that is presently on the floor. So we'll go to Chen, and I will unmute you. Go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for the motion. I was just wondering if I could get a point of clarification on one of the plans before I can decide how I'll vote on this motion. Due to the additional workload that this new organization will be undertaking, will there be any extra compensation given to them?
So you mean like the executives or the directors that remain in office beyond their terms? Is that your question?
For the post-governance review body that's labeled as Board of Directors.
Oh, I see. Yes, so that's one of the recommendations that the consultants have included in the report is that they actually specifically say that the total compensation for the 13-member board be at least not less than, I think is the language, than the salary of the executive director. So it would be substantially more compensation than our volunteer directors or students counselors. Counselors don't receive any compensation. Our directors receive I think it's like $500 a term. So under this model, the proposal from the consultants anyway is that the directors have a sort of more substantial compensation, although it would be less than the executives make presently, for example.
Okay, so by my ballpark, the executive director makes about $130,000, and there's 13 members on the organization, so that's about $10,000 per member. Thanks.
Yeah, that's the ballpark that they've recommended.
Cool. The 10K club. All right, I'm done. Sorry. Thanks.
No, no problem. Thank you for your question. We'll go next to Naman.
Hi. Yeah. So having read through the governance review, like the entire 32-page thing, and the supplementary analysis that was distributed to MATSOC council members, it's like currently unclear to me if the governance review that we're talking about here is a good idea. I've been told by WUSA execs and one of the math counselors that council is going to hammer out these details, and I think we saw that on one of the slides in like a week or so. Especially around like the representation of faculties in this board of directors and like other constituencies like satellite campuses and residence housing. I'll be honest, I'll be a lot more comfortable being in favor of this motion after those details have been ironed out. And right now it's just like up in the air that, what are those things going to look like? How's representation for faculties going to look like? And without knowing that, I don't really know how I want to vote for a motion that essentially starts the process of enacting the governance review. I realize that the timing is critical, that you guys need to like pass the motion right now for it to be enacted in time. But I also want to make sure that anything I say yes for is something that I do agree with. And that doesn't seem to be holding true for this the results of this governance review right now. Yeah, I was wondering if you had any comment on that at all.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I guess what I'll say is you're right that the timing is sort of critical for trying to, like, I guess the spirit for how we have decided to go about implementing the changes or working towards the changes, it has been to minimize disruption to the organization, and like doing it on a more compressed timescale like appears to be the way to do it, especially given the dysfunction that the current system, propagates each year. It definitely is a lot to consider, right? Like we're essentially going to have an entirely new set of bylaws, which is no small undertaking for our organization. There, I guess, is like there's a difficult balance to strike between sort of trying to continue the process and how long to take on sort of consultation. And we are trying our best to be like as transparent about what we intend to achieve, like through this governance review and through, personally, it was in like my, election campaign for whatever that's worth. It was in our annual plan. It's also been in our strategic plan, which was approved last year. And we have tried to be transparent, but understanding like people are at different levels of engagement with the organization. And it's certainly like, I can imagine being a junior counselor and like being like, wow, this is a lot going on. I can appreciate that. But I think like addressing these like fundamental issues is, I think, really critical for like the success of our organization, and that's sort of why we're trying to move ahead with it. But your point is well taken. If you want to respond, please go ahead.
Yeah, the thing that I wanted to confirm was, it's not that I don't think that you guys are not doing the right thing, or that you guys are not doing the thing that you were elected on. It's more that it is unclear to me like what the changes look like. Mm-hmm. And I realize that even like as of this moment, even you don't know what the changes look like, because as you said, they haven't gone through council yet. And yeah, I don't know if I don't know if it's a good idea to like start the process without having a full idea of what the new bylaws look like. Yeah, that's what I have.
Thanks. Yeah, and I maybe should clarify about like the upcoming Students' Council meeting. Like in general, the model of moving to a single board of directors that is elected from the membership is like the critical piece. Is essentially combining Students' Council and the board. Like that is pretty like the clear target. But within that model, there are variations that we'll have to decide based on, you know, our best judgment of what we think is suitable for our organization. So those are things like I mentioned, like the composition of the board, if it's everybody's at large, or having constituencies allotted by faculty, or having the president and vice president elected directly, size of the board, 13 or smaller or larger. But the single governing body is like the end goal that we have in mind. Next is Amanda.
Hi. Thanks. Hi. I just had a quick question because I don't know like if all the segments I watched are under this motion. But there was a part about the execs being paid. So under this model, would they be paid or not?
Thanks, Amanda. So what the recommendation from the consultants is basically not to have full-time executives in the sense that we do now. It would be they recommend that the honorarium for the president be double the honorarium for a regular director, and for the vice president to be 1.5 times. But those are things that are like this motion is definitely like that's kind of a down the road thing. We might decide that we want to have full-time executives, for example, because for whatever reason, like those are the kinds of issues that we'll need to continue to work through. But the execs would be paid. They would continue to be paid. It might not be at the same level that it is now, but they might not be working in full-time positions as we are now, if that answers your question.
I think it does. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Cannon.
I'm going to preface this by saying, technically I graduated this term, so if this governance review passes, doesn't pass, I do not get any benefit out of it. No monetary benefit, no remaining in power or like anything special like that. So I'll preface with, someone brought up the amount of pay the new directors will get. Yes, we will be giving, based on the recommendation, about 10 grand per director. That's $130,000. Currently, the 4 executives together make more than 200 grand. Like, we are still saving costs in the new model, which will be much more efficient and not make student executives feel overwhelmed, which they definitely are right now. The work will be distributed more. So that's, in my eyes, that's a good idea. In terms of not having everything ironed down before we brought this motion to the general meeting agenda, I think the reason we're doing this is because we need more time to actually consult with them. Like, I think Ben has talked about this a lot. Like, we are discussing this with council. Like, this is a huge change which will affect our organization for the next several years to come. And I don't think we can rush this. And like, based on our current bylaws, we need more time. And the only way to do this was to call a special general meeting. Like, I don't think anyone enjoys calling a special general meeting, waiting for 200 people to show up in an online environment and then give a presentation on governance, which can be boring for a lot of people. This is like our job, and we are here because we care for the organization. And we want to make sure we get enough time to actually hear from students. And like, students will still get the opportunity to vote on the actual changes if they want to approve those or not at the March GM. And if they don't, then I'm not saying this will happen, but if students propose not approving those changes, that means we'll have the current governing structure. That means we could maybe call elections in April for the new spring meeting, and the elections don't really have to be delayed to next term. Like, it all depends on different situations, and this is the best way to deal with those situations. So I would hope people would agree to give us, the board, council, full-time staff members who are, some of them are working day and night to figure out these things, and just give them more time to work on that. Yeah.
Thank you, Cannon. Next is Vincent.
Hi, I want to say that this motion's probably a good idea, but as a counselor, I don't feel comfortable voting to extend my own term in office. I'll be abstaining on this item, and I encourage anyone else who holds a position in WUSA and whose term would be extended by this motion to also abstain.
Thank you, Vincent. Nicholas is next. Pardon me while I unmute you. I'm sorry. I'm slipping into council speaker mode.
To this motion and question what the need is, especially where we already have methods by which we can assure that our ideas match with the student body. I'm particularly concerned about two aspects of this. The first of which pertains to the counselors, is an observation that when we refer to council business and we look to council for advice, there are currently faculties that do not have a full gambit of their allotted counselors. There are still spaces on council, and delaying the election of those individuals would reduce the effective input that those faculties would have in order to actually make changes that would improve the governance review in such a way that they would find important. So I feel that suspending elections, especially for counselors, is deeply inappropriate. And prevents the input that is so necessary from groups that are currently underserved. I recognize that those seats may not be filled, but I think it's still important to make an attempt to fill them while we have the chance, so that those students can actually be represented. The second point I would address is my concern that the current executive is looking to extend their term, but is unwilling to actually go up for election a second time. I'm thinking that if something is taking this long, then they should simply attempt to be reelected by the student body. I am concerned that they have decided to instead go this route. The governance review, I can recognize that WUSA's current governance structure is not strong. And while I disagree with the proposed structure, I feel like a much more reasonable route would be to have them run for reelection, as if they intend to stay on for another 12 months, I don't see why we should let them do so without re-speaking with our constituency and getting the will of the people to be properly heard.
Thanks, Nicholas. Just one comment I'll make is the executives have been, I think, like especially careful not to be driving the process ourselves. Like we've continued throughout this process to look to our board and to our council to give us guidance on how to deal with this. So it's certainly not. This bylaw amendment is appearing before the special general meeting because of decisions of council and board, not because of decisions of the executive. But thank you for your comment. Next is Jay.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Can you please tell me how many counselors are present today? Can you give me a quick count?
How many counselors are present today?
Yes.
I don't know that I will have that figure off the top of my head, but I suspect it's fewer than 30. Mike might be able to enlighten us.
I'll give me 60 seconds. I'll do a quick count of my current list, and I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you. Nevertheless, my point is we have a 35 plus members on the council, but as Ben said, fewer than 30 are present today. That's the problem of the current council, right? It's not very efficient. Just one representative from my Concourse, from the Mass Concourse, this person never showed up during the past 8 months. So even the elected representative cannot perform their duties, then the council, of course, is not very efficient to pass any motions. And why I support this motion or support the new governing model is very simple. The 13 members, yes, people might say that putting too much power to the 13 people might damage something. But I believe that with a smaller size of council, the 30 people at least still will present every meeting and do their jobs. If they are not doing their job, they can be fired with a majority vote, I think. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay. So we'll go to Catherine, and Mike, when you have a thing, we'll go to you sort of between terms for the fact check. So Catherine, go ahead.
Hey, I guess one thing is we do our best to fill empty seats throughout the year. We hold by-elections every term to give students the chance to fill those empty seats on council, because we want to get those seats filled, because in the current model that's important. This bylaw amendment specifically has to do with the general election itself, which when the seats are filled under the current model, those would be people who come into their seats, I guess, in May, not during this term. That is to basically refresh the slate of people. So two, I guess, slightly separate issues. Passing this motion doesn't stop us from continuing to try and seek student representatives for everybody and all the perspectives on campus. I'd also encourage people to sort of consider the different facets of diversity. It's not just people from it's not just dependent on like your affiliation within faculties or colleges. There are lots of different facets to what makes a body of students and perspectives diverse. And it's not just the constituencies that we've drawn. Also say that as an executive, the point of this isn't that, I want to extend my term for an extra year. If I wanted to do that, I would rerun. I'm not trying to rerun. I'm trying to be here to support a transition that I think is really important for students to be able to genuinely have better control over the priorities and the operations of the organization, because I don't think that the current system works. I've seen this organization from so many angles. I started volunteering at MathSoc in my first year, and then I was on WUSA Council. I've volunteered with clubs and services, and now I'm an executive, and I swear that so much is hidden from view, and it's difficult to see the magnitude of the issue until you see the inner workings of this machine. And the changes that are going to be proposed for council to take a look at this Sunday, the only goal is to make the governance model of the organization stronger for elected students. Because right now, this executive position, it's not fun. Like, I don't want to do 4 months extra for the fun of it. I want to do 4 months extra because I don't think that this position is good for student leaders, and I think that the new ones that we're creating will be so much better. This isn't about any of the four of us. It's about giving at-large students the ability to actually have just better control over the parts of their student association that actually matter. I feel like I've been rambling, but I just cannot get across how important it is for us to have this kind of runway to properly make sure that the changes that we implement are as good as they possibly can be. I'm not here for the fun of it. I'm here because I think that this is doing best by the at-large undergraduate students. So I really encourage everybody here to vote in favor if you can, and if you think that you have a conflict of interest, you can abstain. I probably will, because I do have a conflict of interest. But if you're here, I really encourage you to vote in favor. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine. And as has been mentioned earlier, I can't really meaningfully monitor the chat. So if you, but there is just one thing that I wanted to clarify. So there's a question of clarification on the timeline. So the annual general meeting is scheduled for this coming March. So in 6 or 8 weeks from now, the date, members will be given due notice. then if everything goes according to sort of the idealistic plan, then we would have an election in like probably the first 2 months of the spring term. So it'd be like May, June of this year, and have like a coming into office perhaps on like July 1st, perhaps September 1st, depending on like that specific timeline will be probably decided by the general meeting at which the bylaws are set to be ratified. The new bylaws are set to be ratified. So it's definitely the timeline, like we expect it to be shorter than a full year. But of course, like that's fundamentally the question that is before this meeting. So I apologize for a digression from the speaking turn. Next is Nicholas.
Thanks, Ben. I think I wanted to bring up a second point as to the, first of all, thanks for clarification there, Catherine. I was concerned about the bylaw issue. I'm still concerned here, though, about the future state of council and constituencies. And my concern there largely relies on the fact that as councilorships at the moment are already in intensive position, and should they expand in scope to be the directorships or whatever we choose to name them, I have a deep concern that they will bias towards individuals who have less busy schedules, and as a result will be inept at properly addressing concerns now that we have sort of had to force to adapt properly. I think especially we will see a lack of representation for fourth-year students who have end of like capstone projects or other major events at the end of their careers. And I am deeply concerned at the inherent bias that we are seeking to introduce to the system in that way. I know that the faculty method of drawing constituency boundaries isn't perfect either, but it at least gets a forced distribution beyond what the model that you're proposing, or sorry, that the lawyers are proposing is. My concern there could be theoretically addressed in future governance review, but I'm concerned that the short-term nature between now and the annual general meeting will not be adequate to actually hit that minimum requirement for adequate representation for all students and all groups across campus.
Thanks, Nicholas. Next is Stephanie. Steph, sorry.
Yeah.
Steph.
Yeah, I thought I was in trouble for a moment. Yeah, I'll say on Nicholas's point that there is definitely there's going to be trade-offs to any sort of governance model that we end up adopting. You know, I'm coming at this from a standpoint of someone who, you know, was involved in council for 2.5 years before becoming executive. Like, personally speaking, when I first looked at the governance review, I asked myself, what the hell is this, right? Like, I've kind of grown to understand the strength of, you know, faculty representation. We are a very divided campus, but in some ways, you know, that's just the model that our university runs off of. I believe in having a lot of people involved in the process. So in a lot of ways, the new governance model is sort of counterintuitive to what I personally hold as values. But I think the more that I've been thinking on it, and definitely my experience as an exec, I feel like it's definitely been different than my coworkers and then a lot of my predecessors who I've seen definitely struggle in these positions. For whatever reason, I've been lucky enough to be able to sort of navigate things in a way where I'm not experiencing a high amount of psychological damage, but I have seen, you know, people who volunteer all their time to students get, you know, completely wasted and probably have long-term trauma resulting from these positions. They're very difficult to juggle sort of the management thing. I have, you know, 5 part-time staff who report to me. I have 2 full-time staff who work with me, all of which are lovely, but I don't have experience in management, and it's even more difficult for, you know, some of my coworkers who have a lot more people reporting to them. You very much get thrown into the fire here, which is why I think on some level, you know, it makes sense having people who, you know, are here for a longer term, to take on some of those management and operational roles. I was involved in a previous sort of governance review that happened 2 or 3 years ago. And I've seen some of the proposals that, you know, at the time as a counselor, I thought would make sense. In practice, it isn't fun. I'll say, you know, I definitely appreciate individual at-large students for your questions and involvement. And these are valid questions to ask, but I think on some level, and maybe this is a little bit, I don't know, it's full of myself to ask this, but, you know, there were times when I, you know, didn't trust the exec before. I was thinking like, you know, I could do a better job, right? Like you're just doing something wrong and that's why you're having such a hard time. But it's happened to so many different people coming from so many different points of views. I also recognize that like I'm not an expert on governance. So there's at a certain point of time, I have to let go and say, you know, if these people who do this for a job are saying that, hey, this will help you, I think that is something that, you know, is worthy to try. I also think it's important for me in saying this to, you know, state sort of my conflicts of interest. Like I would very much like to stay on as exec. Like I've been in university for a while. It would be nice to have full-time work while finishing my career. Like, you know, if I don't have a job, like my parents and grandparents, you know, like that's going to suck. I'm going to be letting them down. So I do have vested interest in this, and that's why I'm abstaining. And I hope that by telling you all of this, that you can believe what I'm saying, but at the end of the day, you know, I'm in someone in position of power. You can be skeptical. I think you should be skeptical. I think, you know, when you're not in positions of power, you should always be skeptical of power. But I guess I'm asking you, I don't know, to be cognizant of these things. I really hope you can trust me. And if you can't, that's understandable too. But thank you all for, you know, listening to my rambling and taking the time for being here. And yeah.
Thank you, Steph. Next is Canon.
I want to start by saying we are trying to introduce this motion, I think, as Matthew put in the chat, because under our current bylaws, we need to have a general election done by the reading week, which is coming up in 2 weeks, I guess, at this point or something. So like, even if we can get the new governance review done and like bylaws and policies and the basic structure done before May 1st, we technically still have to hold an election right now under our current bylaws. Like that's why we are introducing this new bylaw. Second thing I was going to say, in terms of the empty council seats right now, I do get that's an issue because some faculties might not be getting proportionally represented. But there are systems, like we can still hold a by-election. It doesn't have to be a general election to fill those empty seats. Those faculty societies have the power to designate someone temporary to fill those seats so they're fully represented. There are ways. It just, like as a deputy speaker of council, like I have reached out to SciSoc and said, like, you have these many empty seats, please send someone to fill those seats as a designate. It just, we haven't received enough people to fill all the seats for science, like the science caucus, for example. So like, if a student doesn't want to get involved, there's nothing we can do to get this representation in there. Like we are trying our best to do that here. The next thing I was going to mention was, sorry, give me a second. I kind of lost my train of thoughts here. Yeah, like in terms of like, why are people not willing to sign for election here? And I think I would say that for at least some of the execs, they are still in the middle of their studies. Like they have taken a year-long gap from their studies to work for WUSA, to serve students, and they no longer can afford that much break. Like they need to get back to their studies. They want to finish their degrees like all of us, I hopefully do. But they're still willing to like give their time to WUSA for another term, even if it impacts their degree planning or whatever that is, because they believe this is what is best for the organization and for the students at large. So I would hope we would trust the people who are willing to kind of take their own personal plans out, kind of jumble up their own personal plans and work for the students. And the last thing I was gonna say was about, sorry, I had one more thing and my thoughts are all over the place right now because I'm still reading the chat, and it's, yes, in terms of the number of, like, the amount of work that the new director as counselor, whatever the body is called, will have to do. I'm in my 4th year. This is my last term. I work part-time. I'm a counselor. I'm a director. I'm involved in MEF. I have, like, I do various things. So I think it's unfair to say that people in these heavy programs might not be able to do the entire job. Like, if people are, like, interested in doing this job, they will. I have seen people who have done 6 courses, worked part-time, been a director or been a counselor, and they have done the job greatly. And I've seen people whose only job is as a counselor and they haven't done their job well at all. Like, they haven't consulted their constituents or anything like that. So I think we will still get people from every kind of background, hopefully, in the new system. And as Ben mentioned, the current recommendation by the consultants is that we will be moving towards an at-large constituency and not just have faculty-based. But that is still up to debate. Like, you as students will be able to vote on that in the March GM. Like, council will be going through those bylaws, will be approving those bylaws before they come to GM for the final approval. Like, there are still ways, if you think that we need faculty constituencies, that can still happen. Like, the recommendations are not a done deal, except for the one recommendation, which I guess, which was the main recommendation, which is to move away from 4 executives, have bicameral bodies, and to just, like, their recommendation is to have a single body and they will deal with that. So, like, that is the main recommendation we're kind of thinking at. Like, all other recommendations in their report, be that how much they're paid, be that what kind of constituency the board will have, those are all still up for debate at council. Like, and I would hope that you trust the people you elected, or no matter if you voted or not, like, that is the student representation at a university. Like, if you want to see change, run for things. I'm sorry to say it, but, like, or vote for people to get your representatives in there. And, like, that's the best democracy can do. So trust those people who are in this position, to do their job well.
Thank you, Cannon. Next is Amelia. I have to allow your mic. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to comment. I know that people had been talking about faculty constituencies, and I wanted to just echo what Cannon just said, that is certainly up for debate. And I myself am a 4th year health student, so from a very small faculty that might get left out if we just do a whole election instead of constituency election. And this is actually my 1st year on council as well. And I got involved as a 4th year student because I really believed in WUSA, and I'm really encouraged by everybody that I've met at WUSA, execs and counselors included, that they just want the best for the organization, even if they might be moving on from the organization soon. So I think if people want to get involved, they will, and 4th years will get involved in council if they want to be involved in council. And all of that issue about constituencies and faculty reps versus not is something that we need time to debate and we need time to think about, which is what this bylaw that we're voting on today is going to help us do. It will give us the time to go and do the nitty-gritty while allowing our executives and my fellow council members and I to also think about other pressing issues as well. Because if we don't have the extension, we won't have time to focus on return to campus or housing or anything else. So I do recognize that I have a stake in this as well. So I won't tell you how I will vote, but these are all questions that can be answered once council has the time to discuss. And not once council has the time to discuss, council will be discussing these. So concerns about faculty representation and year representation are definitely of notice, and I would say council is aware of these concerns.
Thanks, Amelia. Next is Evan, and I will allow Mike. Go ahead.
Hi. So there's been a lot of talk among different WUSA people in the last hour about how selfless you're being, and how some of you don't want to do this, but it's for the good of the organization. I understand that, but could I please get some points for why should I vote for this motion as a student? Why is this good? Absolutely. And why is it bad to not vote for this? And, under the assumption that I trust all of the WUSA people, why should I vote for this? What's, what will it accomplish that we can't accomplish otherwise?
Thanks, Evan. If I can respond, I guess. The specific question before the meeting on the extension or the postponement of the election that would be taking place right now is basically the reason to vote in favor of that motion is because it is I think the least painful way for, or the least disruptive way for us to get to the new system, which I don't know if your question was maybe more why that is better. But for example, if this motion is to fail, or then basically we have to have an election before the 18th of February, which is definitely not, I mean, it's definitely, usually the election would be almost over by now. So it's, the reason to vote in favor of this specific question is that it's sort of the way to get to where council and board have agreed we should go with the least amount of disruption to the organization is, I guess, the best pitch I can make. If that answers your question, feel free to tell me if it didn't.
There's something I was thinking. I was just hoping for something a bit more concrete, and I also feel with respect to the elections, I feel like it's the fault of the current WUSA executives for having us in this spot where we kind of have to push this motion through, otherwise we'll have a rushed election. I think this is something we probably should have planned for, but I feel a lot of the explanations for why we should have this and why I should vote for this has been a little bit vague and hasn't been very concrete.
Okay, thanks, Evan. Next is Vincent.
I just want to say I appreciate the concerns people have about constituency representations. I also have these concerns. I've told the executives, I think pretty clearly multiple times, if at least for me, if there's no constituency representatives, I will happily torpedo this entire thing. And I think it's very likely we'll have constituency representatives because, frankly, I don't think it's likely that council will approve that the students they represent lose representation. Yeah.
Thanks, Vincent. So on the agenda, we had scheduled an adjournment at 7 p.m. So I'll invite anybody who's currently in the speaking list to move that we postpone adjournment. I know we came to order a bit later, almost an hour later than we intended, but I'll just put that out for everybody's information, and we will go to Coral next.
Okay, great. Hi. I just wanted to kind of get back to what this bylaw would go on to solve the issue of time and bringing about the method that WUSA wants to go in. I was just wondering the changes that WUSA wants to make, what issues are they going on to address?
Thanks, Coral. So really the specific issue is that the current governing system is not appropriate for the scope of organization that we have. And sort of there hasn't been a lot of like strategy in how our organization's governance has developed. It's just sort of been, decades of kind of iterative change and slight amendment, and it's led us to this sort of really crazy convoluted system that has, including all of our governing documents, it's like over 500 pages. And then the way that we tell governance volunteers to become oriented to the system is, well, just read these 500 pages and then you'll know everything, which is like, frankly, absurd. Nobody does that. And it's an unreasonable expectation to have people have like memorized, policy 23 that was written in 2007. Like nobody does that. And that was really the motivation, like identifying those issues and like the executive burnout and the stuff that people have talked about was sort of the motivation for, okay, we need to address this issue. And through like professional sort of consultants, they have suggested this is what is an appropriate system to govern a nonprofit organization of your scope, and to sort of separate operations and management, operations from governance. So, you have the governing board that says, this is how we want the organization to develop and like what we want to move towards, and basically gives the instructions to staff to do that. If that answers your question.
It does. Is it okay to ask another follow-up question?
Please, yeah.
Great. I was just wondering, is the idea that these changes cannot come about unless this bylaw is passed because members of this organization are moving on, and that could not be done quickly without the current members here? Is that the idea?
That was at least, I think, part of the discussion, was that like substantial progress had been made in like actually doing the review in the fall term, and trying to sort of see it through. There is, so like, I think the more reason was that it's bad for the organization for the status quo to continue, and we want to move away from it sort of as reasonably quickly as we can. But that is, I think, a factor to sort of why this motion has like why this amendment has gone through the process it has to get here. Next is Edward.
Yeah, I want to speak to maybe just a broad glance at the governance and kind of what one perspective on it that might make it easy to understand, which is WUSA has changed a lot over the last few years. Imagine all the changes that happened in the last decade, never mind even the last few years since the pandemic. The school population has grown enormously. We've had several new programs. We've had countless changes to, our awareness of social issues, the way to run businesses sustainably, environmental issues. And with that, our governance system was built way back when the organization was first founded back in 1960s. It is not up to date for what we need right now and has become a complicated mess that nobody is able to fully understand. What this governance review is proposing to do is, instead of that, we want to make it much more clear-cut, make it designed for what we need a student union to do now in 2022, and the best way that we can get students what they want out of their student organization. The way to do this is been presented after consulting with experts, and the details we can discuss further. But the reasons for doing this in this kind of time frame is particularly, I think I make the analogy that if you're familiar with co-op, you have students cycling every 4 months trying to complete a project. It makes very little progress if you have students kind of constantly cycling in and cycling out. You have maybe 1 or 2 people who are familiar with the project at the company, but that's not their full-time role. And what ends up happening, if you're familiar with this, is those projects, if they're not completed within those 4 months, they often just kind of languish in a middle ground forever. And that's what we're trying to avoid by setting up this election timeline is we have a team of people who have dedicated an enormous amount of time into investigating, researching, and consulting people to find a solution to this issue, and that we hope that by doing this in one shot, we can be done with it. We don't have to drag it out unnecessarily by having to train up a new set of people, get them all familiar with the system, get them to do the exact same legwork that's already been done, and hopefully have a single clean transition to a very nice governance structure that fits what we need in this year. Hopefully that makes sense to some people who are confused.
Thank you, Edward. Next is Nicholas.
Hey, everybody. It's me again. I am going to bring up a point that I feel is important here, in that I feel we've chosen to go down the route of governance review, and I feel like while it's needed, and I recognize the current issues of the system, I feel like the recommendations that we've received do not reflect the reality that the current WUSA system operates in many ways more like a municipal government or a small organization like that, rather than a nonprofit in the traditional sense. I feel like the recommendations that we've received thus far might make sense if the body was different in nature, but we're dealing with a group of student representatives who are treating the way that we go about policy and other things in many ways as though we are a smaller form of government, treating students with a constituency entirely of students. I think it's especially important to recognize the need for WUSA to not act like a traditional NGO and a traditional nonprofit in its current in the recommended form, as it is not a traditional nonprofit and it's not a traditional NGO. Especially with the inaction of Waterloo City Councillors. I know that there are some exceptions to this, but the general displeasure of Waterloo City Councillors to addressing student issues and neglecting the sheer number of students that happen to reside in Waterloo, and it's entirely because we don't happen to be voting members. So there's no incentive for them to represent us, and I feel like a transition towards the more traditional nonprofit model will further disservice our ability to advocate for students in a way that would be comparable to replacing the lack of municipal support that we're experiencing now.
Thanks, Nicholas. I'll just say quickly, I think your comparison between WUSA's governance and municipal governance is apt, and you might find it interesting to know that one of the two consultants is actually is a mayor in Nova Scotia, and there definitely are a lot of comparisons between like the scope of the operations that are the corporation WUSA does to like a corporation of a city or a town, and at least in Ontario, every municipality basically has a board of directors that they call a council, and it acts as sort of like the representatives of the residents and a trustee of the property in the capital, and sort of like combining the function of board and council that is being proposed in this model. Next is Ryan. Pardon me, you should be good to go now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so from what I understand, the timeline is as follows. Normally, there would be an election in February, very soon. Then the annual general meeting is where this new governance model will be proposed and possibly put into place. And it will be implemented in the spring term, latest September. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a couple of like variations. So if this motion passes, then we don't have an election and we intend to move forward. So for the bylaws to make their way to the annual general meeting, they must first be approved by council and the board. So the intention is to try to have the bylaws to the general meeting for ratification in March, and then yes, an election in the spring term.
Yeah, so right, so even if the new model does not pass, there'll still be an election in the spring term for the old model, as just so delayed by a couple of months.
Yeah, that's a good question, and actually something that probably I imagine the general meeting would probably have to resolve the annual general meeting, where if say we have passed this motion to postpone elections, but then we don't ratify the new bylaws, then it would seem that we would have to have an election to the existing model, to council and to board and to the executive. And I imagine the general meeting would be best placed to sort of give guidance on that, although this bylaw gives that power essentially to the board and council, who would, I imagine, defer to, or not defer, but look to the general meeting for advice on how to deal with that as sort of the representatives of the membership.
Okay, so the point of delaying the election is so that WUSA can decide whether to go with the new model or stay with the old model, then have an election. Is that pretty much it?
Yeah, the real idea is to avoid having an election, then having the annual general meeting in March where they decide we want to move to a new model, and then having people in office for 2 months. That is basically what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to just move straight to the new model. Is kind of the spirit. Okay.
Is it possible to change the number of months to something less than 12?
You are welcome to move an amendment.
Okay, I would like to move an amendment.
Do you have a specific amount of time in mind?
I don't know. I was thinking either 6 or 8. What do people think in the chat?
I think you might just have to make a call here, Ryan. Sorry to put you on the spot.
There's a couple for 6, one for 4, a few for 8. Okay, we'll go with 7 because someone wrote September as the latest they want to implement the new model. So 7.
Okay. So there is a motion to amend the proposed bylaw amendments to change the date not later than 7 months after the annual general meeting. So to be clear, the annual general meeting isn't scheduled for March. So that would be 7 months from March to October.
Sure.
Okay.
This is fine.
And then this one would say 7 months after the end of the winter academic term. Is there a second to that motion to basically change 12 months to 7 months in both of these? Is there a second? We don't have a good way to do this. Maybe if somebody...
I'll second.
Okay, I'll recognize Matt's hand raised.
I
realize people have limited functionality, like accessing the meeting, so it's not great. But Matthew, Ryan Delaert has moved an amendment to change 12 to 7 months. Matthew Schwartz has seconded. So then we will have to keep a speakers list from what is here right now. So it'll be Nicholas and Vincent when we come back. And I will have everybody lower their hands, and we will start speaking to the amendment that is now on the floor. So to be clear, we're basically, this is not a Word document, but this and this will become 7. Does anybody wish to speak to the amendment that's on the floor? So we'll go to Nicholas.
I'm sorry. I thought the speaker list meant that once we left the speaking to the amendment, you would return to me after that. Am I wrong?
I thought I had lowered your hand and then.
Oh no, you hadn't lowered our hands yet. Sorry.
My apologies. Okay, then Neman is next.
Yeah, I think Stephanie raised a point in the chat that it's problematic to have the thing not aligned with term boundaries. So maybe you want to pick a number that's like aligning with term boundaries. I don't know.
Well, it from March, 7 months is what, October? And then from end of April, that'll be what, November?
Yeah.
I don't know. This is a maximum, just by the way. Like, I think the plan is to call the election a lot sooner unless something catastrophically goes wrong. Why do we want to change it to like 6? I don't know.
So unfortunately, we're kind of in like a
amendment to the amendment.
Motion to amend the motion to amend the motion to amend.
Everybody, please mute. I'm speaking. So this is where like the formality of Robert's rules becomes a bit cumbersome, because there's a specific motion on the floor for a 7 months instead of 12 months. I think my sense is that people want there to be an election basically by September. In other words, during the spring term. So I think the way to deal with this is to basically to defer the election to any date that is not later than September 1st of 2022. And that would basically force there to be an election in the spring term, regardless of the outcome of the annual general meeting. So once again, I'm going to ask people to lower hands. And I'm going to ask if anybody in the assembly opposes that. So if you disagree with changing that there will be an election in the spring term, then raise your hand now and then we can do it formally. But if everybody on the call is in agreement of during the spring term, then we'll take it as the consensus of the meeting, and it will spare us some trickery. Steph, do you wish to speak, or are you voicing your opposition?
I just have a question.
Okay.
So we're sitting around the requirement for when an election occurs, but I'm wondering if it lines up with like when the new folks end up taking the role. Because I think it's fine with the September 1st thing, but I want to be cognizant that like the reason why I was asking things to line up with the terms was because like if like you want to make sure that whatever students end up taking the roles, they are doing it like not in the middle of a semester in which they had school, right? Like, because that will probably mess with people if they want to take a lighter course load, or if like parts of the roles end up being full time. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I think we're fine. But if you can like
clarify,
I guess. Okay.
The text that we're deciding here is to authorize the board and council to pick a date. We're choosing the window, not the date. So like those considerations will be, I'm sure, made by board on the advice of council. But like the question we're dealing with here is less about the logistics of when people are going to be becoming elected and more how much latitude are we willing to give the board and council, if that helps to clarify. Okay. So I'll ask again that, so is it the consensus of the assembly to change to any date that is not later than the 1st of September 2022 and to any date that is not later than the 1st of September 2022 for both of the highlighted portions. I'll ask for 1st of September 2022, Vincent. Does anybody oppose that or wish for us to deal with it in further detail? Now is your opportunity to do so by raising your hand or otherwise. Okay. Okay. So I'm not seeing any opposition to that through the raising hand function. So I will take it as the consensus of the general meeting that we amend the text of the bylaws of the amending bylaw. I really am sorry for the nested language. That the not later than the 1st of September 2022 for both of these. And that will be basically the question that we're to vote on. So so now we've amended the motion. It reads slightly differently than what you see on your screen. And it will be not later than the 1st of September 2022. And I will write that down. Okay. So now we are back to the main question to vote on the motion basically before us as amended.
I did a thing.
We did a thing. Does anybody wish to speak to the motion?
I think I'm first in the speaking order.
Oh, yes, you're right. And then Vincent. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to, first of all, reply to your comment in my previous statement and express my concern at you missing the point of what I was trying to say there. I think it is a poor choice to try and compare the current review recommendations, which have a pseudo-elected position of a CEO that is not approved time after time, as it is not representative of what we see in a municipal organization. A municipal organization will have a chief, a mayor, for instance, who is elected repeatedly. And I recognize that because WUSA elections are so frequent, that is not exactly feasible, especially as we're trying to train people up. Though I feel our approach to, rather than trying to remove CEOs as they come and go, depending on how well they're doing, I feel our approach should much more be biased towards being required to reapprove the CEO. And I don't even care necessarily as much if it's the board that would have to reapprove the CEO, as I recognize that holding an election every year in that way would just make it back into a new president. Though the sort of defensive nature of the position would be much more reflective of requiring the assent of the student body rather than a perpetual machine that just makes by on the inability of students to collectively decide that things have gone down the drain. My second concern here, which is separate from the first, is that some aspects of Senate procedural proceedings, and now I'm not, I admit, well versed enough to know to what extent, though I do know from what I've recalled that that the Senate committee appointments often coincide with the election of a new president to WUSA in the winter term. Does the current executive intend to follow through with that normal process, or will we be holding the committee appointments from the past, despite a change in Senate membership into the future months? And also, additionally, I would really appreciate if you spoke to the point of the current structure of Senate and how governance review may impact that. As I am concerned that our current structure requires the WUSA president, though it could change, to contribute nominations to Senate committees. I would appreciate if you speak to that aspect.
Sure. So just one point, I know I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of municipal government, but the analog between the CEO or the executive director in this model and a municipal government is the chief administrative officer, which is a full-time staff in a permanent position. a mayor is not a chief executive officer. A mayor is essentially a speaker or chair of the board, which is not an executive. So like the mayor is the president of the council, basically, right? To the question about Senate appointments, there will continue to be a WUSA president who likely will serve the same function that like is already expected of them with respect to university like administrative committee appointments. There would be changes, like for example, the Student Services Advisory Committee, which approves ancillary fees, including athletics and so on, is currently the 4 WUSA executives plus another student who sort of represents students on that committee. In this case, it would likely be members of the board of WUSA or the council of WUSA or whatever we want to call it. But then like the independence of senators would not be like altered in any way. Like senators have a sort of a separate duty to the university under the University of Waterloo Act. As much as WUSA would want to, have the senators sort of on board with our stances, the reality is senators are sort of an independent creature.
Sorry, I think my point there is I'm not talking about university committees. I meant Senate committees, which, like the Senate Undergraduate Committee, for instance.
I don't expect there would be any changes to how those appointments work, though. Like it's if usually the practices of the
I meant more
asks,
you guys are intending to delay the election. Normally, Senate committee appointments are updated fairly soon from now. Will you intend to update those appointments before you leave office?
I would continue the duties of my office. If I'm asked to make appointments, I would do that. If that answers your question.
That more appropriately answers my question.
Cool. Okay, then next is Jay. Thank you, Nick.
Okay, thank you. I just have a question about the timeline again. So if this motion is passed today, and we have the next council meeting on this Sunday, so this only give us a month and a half to present a well-written and very detailed new bylaws to the general meetings. Do you think we have enough time to do that? So if we didn't make this timeline, I mean the March general meeting, do we need another special meeting to approve the bylaw if we didn't make it to the general meeting?
So if the bylaws aren't ready for, like, ultimately they do need to be approved by a general meeting. Ideally, it would be the annual general meeting. But if it's not ready in time, then it would have to be a special general meeting like this one. What I'll say is I think that through our work with council, we've kind of narrowed down the substantive questions about the model that we need to work out, at least at the level of bylaws, which are basically constituency or at large, and the size of the board, and the perhaps the direct or indirect election of the officers. So if you run specifically to be president or vice president, or if you are elected among the directors for those offices and everybody just runs to be a director. And I think that we can, the scope of those questions is there's a handful of options that you can do within that. And I think I'm optimistic that we can deal with that within this month. If it requires multiple meetings of council, but I'm optimistic that it can be done, is what I'll say. But ultimately, if it's not ready for the annual general meeting, then it would require a general meeting of some sort to ratify bylaw changes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Next is Samer. And I will allow you to use your mic. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Listening closely to the discussions, it seems like a lot of what we're discussing and debating over the past hour can and will be discussed in the upcoming GMN Council. I would like to go ahead and call the question.
Point of order. You cannot call a question after having spoken.
I think the call to question is in order. He didn't make any substantive point. He made pleasantries before calling the question. I think the call to question will come to the floor if there's a second. So raise your hand if there's a second. Okay, I'll see Jay as seconding the call to question from Sam Razumot. Okay, so this is some fun technicality stuff. So we will now have a vote on basically, so a motion to call the question means that we will end debate and proceed immediately to voting on the question, which is the motion as amended. So for the call to question to proceed, it requires 2/3 of the members present to vote in the affirmative. So I will ask that if you support calling the question and then if you support calling the question and it succeeds, we'll go immediately to voting. If you oppose and you think we should have further debate, you should oppose calling the question. And you're not entitled to abstain, you have to pick. So I will ask all those who are opposed to calling the question, so those that want to continue debate, to raise their hands now. And it will require 2/3 of the people present, or more than 1/3, and we will continue debate. Okay. So it appears that there are 5 people in favor, or sorry, 5 people opposed to calling the question, which would leave the remainder in favor. So the question is called, the motion carries, and we go directly to the vote on the question before us, for which Mike has a Microsoft form, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. Do you want to do some logistical explaining how this vote will work, Mike?
Okay, can everybody hear me? Good. Okay, so I have a Microsoft form. It reads, please indicate your vote on agenda item 3, ratification of bylaw amendments to postpone the 2022 general election. I have put in square brackets, amending the timeline to read, defer this election to any date that is not later than September 1st, 2022 in both subsections. So that has been highlighted before, where you see that 12-month parenthetical, what we just sort of went through with the amendment. I will share this in the chat with everybody. Make sure that you are signed in with your Waterloo address, credential, sorry, on your browser, because that is the binary check we are doing to make sure that people can access and vote on this. That way we will make sure that only members can vote and there are no people who are not authorized. So, sorry, my computer has been crawling due to all of this wonderful chat. So it's going to take me a second to paste this in, but once it is, feel free to log in and vote.
Can you send the link in the chat, Mike? I don't know if we're waiting on that or.
Do you see it now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so I will allow people until 7:34 to vote on this question. So it's about 3 minutes. And I shall return.
Oh, yes. In terms of being noted, yes. I will, if you want to post in the chat, we'll make sure that that makes it into the minutes as well. Thank you for that comment.
Okay, less than a minute remaining on voting. So I updated to Windows 11 and they don't have the second by second countdown on the clock anymore when you click on it, which is kind of sad. Maybe they do and I'm just useless. Okay, it is 7:34. So, Mike, if you could please read the results of the vote.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
So we have 77 in favor, 16 abstaining. Sorry, no, 14 abstaining and 20 in opposition. So 77, okay. 14, 20.
So the motion carries. And we proceed to item 4 on our agenda, which is the ratification of a bylaw amendment to reduce general meeting quorum. The Board of Directors has passed the following bylaw amendment pursuant to subsection 1(3) of Article 14 of the bylaw, which is to say the board approved this with unanimous consent to put it on the agenda. So the resolution reads, be it resolved that the special general meeting ratify the following bylaw amendment as approved by the Board of Directors to replace subsection 4(1) in Article 5 of the bylaw as follows. Quote, a quorum for the transaction of business at any meeting of members shall consist of at least 100 voting members present in person or represented by proxy. Would any member wish to move that motion? Cannon will move. Is there a second? Vincent will second. Cannon Sharma, Vincent Macri. Okay. So then we'll open a speaking order to discuss this item. So I see, Vincent, your hand is still up. If you would like to speak to the motion on the floor, please go ahead.
Cannon, as the mover, should speak first.
Okay. Go ahead, Cannon.
I think the reason for this motion is pretty obvious in sense. I think even at this meeting, we had to wait nearly an hour before we reached quorum. I have been going to GMs for the last 4 years at WUSA, and it is a struggle to get people, even in person, to get the 200 mark. And I think it's not fair for the people who are actually showing up and care about the organization that they showed up, but because there are not enough people who care about something, that we're not able to transact business, which actually affects students and how we serve them. In my opinion, 200 is not really a representative mark of 36,000 undergrads that we have on campus. Neither is 100, but I think 100 makes it much more easier for us to reach quorum and actually transact business. And if people actually are if people are afraid that that might be misused in a way, then they can show up if they're against some specific motion or some specific topic or are in favor of a specific topic and speak about that. But sometimes we're not able to approve our audit. Sometimes we're not able to select our new auditors or just approve any new fee changes, decrease fee, increase fee, add any new fee, or ratify general elections. And I think just the entire process of GM being a representative body doesn't really work well. And I'm hoping that at least for the next AGM, we can work well and better and be able to transact our business faster, because we don't have to wait for another 100 people to show up like we had to today. Like, this is especially an issue in an online GM where there is no food as an attraction for people. We have tried that in the past, and even with that, it's difficult sometimes. So it's way more difficult to do it in an online world, and I think people should vote in favor of this.
Thank you, Cannon. Vincent, would you like to go?
I call the question.
Okay. Is there a second to calling the question? Cannon appears to have seconded the call to question. Okay, so folks, we're experts at this now. I will ask if anybody opposes calling the question and would like to continue debate on this item, to please indicate so now by raising your hand. Okay, I see 4 people opposed to calling the question, which is meaning that the question shall be called, and we will proceed to a vote on the motion before the special general meeting to ratify the bylaw amendment that you see here. Mike, we are going to administer the vote in a similar manner. You're muted, but I don't know if you're, okay, there you go.
Yeah, my computer is crawling, so even though I'm gonna probably paste this into the chat like 20 seconds from now, you might not get it for another like 60. So we're gonna try and see.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, so this one reads, please indicate your vote on agenda item 4, ratification of bylaw amendments to reduce general meeting quorum. So you should see it pop into the chat in the next 10 to 20 seconds. Cameron, that's a good comment. I'm also doing a backup recording, so my computer is doing like double work right now. So I think that's why it's doing some hard times, but hopefully everybody sees that now or soon and can jump in.
Yes, it has appeared. So we will wait. We will vote until 7:44. So
Ben,
about 3 minutes.
Ben, one other thing has come up. Just a question. We voted on the ratification of bylaw amendment, like the last thing we just voted on. Mm-hmm. Was that voting on the amendment or the whole motion? Because I think we might have skipped voting on the whole motion.
No, so the amendment was done on unanimous consent of the assembly. So okay. We basically skipped having to do multiple votes because everybody agreed.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll write that in.
Jay?
I just want to make sure that we counted the proxy votes.
Mike is nodding in the affirmative of having scrutinied. Yes, Matthew, but we'll play nice. 1 minute remaining for voting in the poll that Mike sent earlier. Okay, it is 7:44, so I'll ask Mike to read the results.
Okay.
I think.
Yeah. So the results. My mute. Okay.
Sorry, I think there's some lag going on here. You were muted, then you were unmuted, but you're presently muted. You can read the results. Yeah, sorry. It's been a long day.
Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you.
Okay. 73 in favor. 11 abstaining. 15 opposed.
Okay, so the motion carries. That brings us to item 5, which is discussion on Waterloo student housing. I'll note for the minutes that we did informally dispense this item before coming to order, but I'll welcome the vice presidents back to sort of continue their presentation. I would also be amenable to a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Okay.
I'll second.
Yeah.
There is a motion to adjourn from Matthew Schwartz, seconded by Catherine Dong. Does anybody wish to speak to the motion to adjourn? Is there any debate on that? Nicholas.
Hello. No, I'm in fact not going to call for a division of the House, but I wish you all a great evening.
Excellent. Okay, Ryan, and then after that, we're not going to debate. We'll do a little vote.
So, do I have the chance to win money?
I believe there's a way.
I think that we're going to let our staff say goodnight, and you'll hear tomorrow there will be winners chosen.
Okay. Okay, then I adjourn the meeting at 7:46. Thank you, everybody, for making WUSA history, the first ever online general meeting. Hell yeah, we did it.
Dear God, thank you for staying with us this whole time.